Welcome to the Superintendent's Hangout, where we discuss topics in education, charter schools, life in general, and not necessarily in that order. I'm your host, Dr. Sharetta. Come on in and hang out. This episode is brought to you by McGriff Insurance Services and Senior Vice President Mike Lutosky. For over a century, McGriff has focused on building long-term relationships to deliver innovative insurance solutions. The McGriff name dates back to 1886 and the founding of McGriff, Sables, and Williams. Today, McGriff is part of Truist Insurance Holdings, Inc., one of the top 10 largest insurance brokers in the world. McGriff provides highly consultative risk management and insurance solutions for businesses of all sizes, as well as for personal insurance needs. Coverages available include commercial property and casualty, small business, employee benefits, management liability, personal lines, and much more. Mike Lutosky's expertise is wide-ranging and includes transitioning employers from fully insured to partially self-funded medical, dental, and vision programs, HRA wrap programs, reference-based pricing, healthcare pricing transparency, pharmacy consulting, wellness programs, marketing, implementation, and ongoing management of fully insured benefit plans, and much more. Mike can be reached on his cell phone at 619-925-1731. All proceeds from this sponsorship support the Eric C. Mitchell Scholarship Fund at Albert Einstein Academies. The scholarship benefits graduates who exemplify the outstanding human qualities that define Mr. Mitchell's legacy. In this episode, I sat down with Marilyn George. Dr. George is Executive Vice President of the Accrediting Commission of Schools, Western Association of Schools and Colleges. I know that's a mouthful. The abbreviation is ACS, WASC, ACS WASC, as it's called in the business. Dr. George has been actively involved in all aspects of accreditation, supporting school change for nearly 40 years. Her doctorate from UCLA addressed the areas of school improvement, professional development, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. She is the co-author. She recently partnered with WASC President Dr. Barry Groves on a new book entitled Connecting the Dots of Accreditation, Leadership, Coherence, and Continuous Improvement. Dr. George and I talked about a wide range of topics related to schools, school improvement, the history of school accreditation in the United States and globally, the importance of staying focused on the needs of students, the importance of being able to clearly define what expected outcomes are as a school and a school community. And I would argue any endeavor in life that's of value, we need to be able to understand what the end objective is that we're aiming for. And the fact that WASC could just as soon stand for We Are Student-Centered. She tells the story of where that comes from in this episode. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did recording it with Dr. George. Welcome, Marilyn. It's great to have you on the show. I was wondering if you could tell us about yourself, what your origin story is, your involvement with WASC, school accreditation, and anything else you want us to know about your journey so far in life.
Thanks, David. To summarize, I was raised in a family where education was next to godliness, and so it was natural for me to move into education. And so I pursued a doctorate degree in looking at how schools continually improve at UCLA. And that was sort of the pivotal point where I left my math, biology teaching job and moved into administration, working with schools in terms of continuous improvement through professional development and coaching and follow-up. And then that led me to begin work at California Department of Education on a process called Program Quality Review, which led me to work at that time with the accreditors that were working with the State Department. This was back in the mid-'80s, to have a nice synchronized joint process. And so we actually formed an MOU with California Department of Ed and the Accrediting Commission for Schools that schools would combine their program review process at that time with accreditation as one continuous improvement process. And so I've been with WASC 36 years, but it really started at that time, and it's never been a dull moment.
Wow, that's quite a career trajectory from that until to the present, where we have high schools where WASC accreditation is a requirement, right? At least for students to attend UC schools in California.
That's correct. In other words, WASC is the accrediting body that schools really need to be accredited if they are operating in California, and that gives them permission to have approval of A to G courses for the UC system. We have a formal memorandum of understanding with the UC and, of course, with the state system, and we communicate regularly with them.
Full disclosure, my first involvement with WASC was as a first-year charter school principal in the early 2000s, and we'd received a Walton Foundation grant, and one of the conditions of the grant in order to get the second disbursement of monies was that we would seek WASC accreditation. That was kind of the Better Business Bureau seal of approval, so to speak. And so that, at the time, coming out of a K-8 school, I had very little exposure.
Right. And that's often what we find, and that's part of my job, to help leadership see the value of what I call connecting the dots, which is the title of our book. But in 2003, the UC board system actually passed a ruling that public and private schools needed to be accredited if their A to G courses were going to be approved. And they had 3 years to address it. So we found more and more schools that had not been accredited seeking to work with us. And then as the charter school movement developed and evolved, this became very important as we worked collaboratively with the charter school organizations to build the capacity and understanding what are unique features of charter schools, and to be sure we are addressing those through our process, which we did.
Yeah, I noticed that for charter schools, there's one criteria that addresses local resources and support, I think support of a local charter board, that a non-charter school, it's not applicable. The assumption is that a school district, their resources they're differently resourced, right? And so I know for charter schools, I'm sure you can remember which criteria area it is, but that is interesting to me that there's a carve out in the way that the visits are conducted, that charters are in that area ask different questions.
Right. No, I actually remember the meeting where Dr. David Brown was executive director at that time, and we convened representatives from all the different charter groups talking about how we could strengthen the process and address their needs. And out of that came a draft. We first had 2 criteria. It was in the resource and sustainability area. And then we were able to condense it into 1. But it's been a powerful criterion. And then we also work closely with the California Department of Ed to be sure we're updated on legislation and changes as we work with charter schools. So teams going out are aware of different expectations. As you know, in the past few years, there had been some changes in charter school law that we understand in terms of like credentialing of teachers.
Yeah, I've reflected on my journey in the charter world. I think I'm in year 29, and so early days, it was the Wild West. When I was hired, you didn't need a teaching credential. I'm not even sure that you needed a college degree to be a teacher. And the first iteration of charters in California, and then over time it evolved, and the regulations got a lot more stringent in that regard.
That's correct. And we're seeing the same thing evolving in Hawaii as we work with them also, as they fine-tune some of the charter school expectations.
And Hawaii is interesting. My understanding is that every school in Hawaii is WASC accredited, right?
That's correct. As of 2012, the state board added all 159 elementary schools. We phased them in. Prior to that, it was just high school, middle school, and adult schools, so that we work with all of them as it's one school system in the state of Hawaii.
That's, I think, a wise move. Is California just too big and cumbersome to do something similar?
Well, I think because they're each individual district, each governing board. And I think one of the things, those that are on the podcast that are remembering, way back when the State Department created a requirement program quality review, particularly for elementary and middle schools. So elementary and middle schools, that was a similar assessment process. and that since their students were not going on to college, did not need to be accredited. And of course, there are other hidden things in legislation throughout the nation. If you are not graduating from an accredited school, the military technically does not have to take you, or you cannot enroll in certain nursing programs. There are other hidden expectations. So to have a diploma from a non-accredited school could create barriers down the way, unfortunately.
And accreditation's not without its controversy in certain settings, right? I know
That's
that
correct.
if I'm not mistaken, Florida, and perhaps I've got the state wrong, but I know there's at least one state where the governor is trying to either remove accreditation altogether or trying to stack the boards of accrediting agencies. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it's different from California?
Well, what we find is, if you go back historically, and when Dr. Groves and I wrote the book on connecting the dots, originally the concept of accreditation emerged for us in the 60s, but it wasn't new. It was something coming across the country where the idea was quality assurance. This is an okay school, so then Harvard should accept the child, Yale. And what happened in California, Senior Commission and colleges began formalizing their accreditation process in the late 40s. And then the University of California had what they call the master list of public and private quality high schools. And leaders in the secondary said, that's not right. We need to create our own standards, which they did, to approve what is a quality high school. And that emerged in 1962 as a nonprofit formalized signing group called the Accrediting Commission for Schools. That would be the third aspect of WASC, which is senior college accreditation and community college. And so then they've created a series of different protocols and structures. And the founding members were public and private members, so that we started with few board members. Now WASC has 35 representing all these different constituencies. So what we found is it was a grassroots movement which was to the benefit of the concept. If you go anywhere today, accreditation is defined as a continuous improvement process. It's more than just, oh, you've got the good housekeeping seal of approval. And I think that's important because that's where I come in my work of how do you use this to move from where you want to be now to where you want to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years from now.
What do you say to the people for whom the prospect of WASC coming to visit is a source of great stress, and they talk about doing WASC, and this month we're doing WASC, or this semester we're doing WASC, and once we're done with this, we can get on to doing our normal jobs. What do you say to that?
Well, I will say, and of course, pre-COVID, we were able to do this in person. I will say, repeat after me, we will be accredited. We will be accredited. We will be accredited. Now, how are you going to use this process to look deeply at, do we have a focused direction? Are we looking at how well students are learning? Are we doing everything possible? And what are our next steps? And how do we engage everyone in that process? And I said, the chance of your not being accredited is slim. The key is there may be point issues that need to be addressed. We want you to be proactive. It's your process, but we're supporting you. Now, recently, under the direction of Dr. Barry Groves, the current president, we've strengthened our personalized support so that under Barry and me, we have 2 vice presidents for national work. We have a vice president international work. We have directors, and each one is assigned a school and therefore the visiting team to be coach and advisors to support the concept of continuous improvement. So I will share a little story, David. This has stuck with me for years. I remember meeting with a private school that was exploring, do we want to be accredited? And I explained the power of being our self-reflection, evaluative process. Everyone's involved. Everyone owns the plan. and that you're always looking at, is it working, not working, what do we do next? And the chairman of the board was a woman and put her hands to her head and said, "Oh my word, what did we get into? This never ends." And I broke into a big smile and I said, absolutely. We are student-centered, and this is a 24/7 process. Every day you're doing accreditation. You don't use that word, but you're analyzing, assessment, revamping, even as teachers reflect on what worked today in the classroom and what didn't. So I get very excited about this because we're providing the tools and structures, as you mentioned earlier, particularly for those new principals. In today's world, there are many principals that have been in elementary for years, and suddenly they're asked to be a high school principal or a middle school principal, and they say, I've got on my list, and they treat it as a to-do list. So we're going to come in and provide training and support and say, no, here's how you can use this to build. Yesterday at our commission meeting, we had a principal from a school that really has maximized the use of the process. And one of the questions we asked her to say, now that the formal WASC visit is over and that you've updated your plan, how are you going to keep that momentum going? And it was very exciting to say, well, through this, I'm building my teacher leadership. We're going to be looking at data and modifying because they own the plan.
Yeah, it's very distinct from, I think, the idea that it's something analogous to an IRS audit, right? I've never been audited by the IRS, but I'd imagine once you get done with it, you go, oh, thank God, I'd never want to go through that again. And this is more like a physical. The visit is, I see it as the visit is like a physical. You go into, you're having your physician come check you out, but doesn't mean that the day after the visit, then you start chain smoking, right? You continue to take their health recommendations and put them in place and exercise and eat well and sleep and all that. And so then in a year or 2 or 5, they come again, and in between they ask you to submit a report with data on how your health is doing. And as you say, it's a 24/7 process. How have you seen the accreditation landscape change in your 36 years? I know there are other players now. There are players internationally who are, in some sense, competitors of WASC. Can you speak to how the landscape has changed?
We really work on collaborating with other accrediting agencies, but let me go back to WASC has been on the forefront of the burning questions. It was really exciting in the early 90s as we collaborated with California Department of Ed and private school groups and throughout the world, and said, if we were going to modify accreditation, how do we want to move? And what we did was we literally threw out what I call traditional accreditation. And we said the bottom line are our driving concept questions. How well is every child at your school learning? Is the school doing everything possible to support high quality learning and obviously well-being? And then the struggle part, which our process supports, is, well, how do you know that? Can't be just your opinion. Do you look at student work? Do you observe how students are engaged in the learning? Do you talk to them and get their student insight and voice? How do we use multiple types of data? And so we created a process entitled Focus on Learning. And that is the premise. I would argue our process is basic change. If you study any researcher on change, and so our guiding principles are everyone's involved. We're clear on what we believe, what are the key learning needs of the students, what are their overall student goals. Now, what exists at our school based on our vision, mission, and beliefs? Are we effective? If not, what are we going to do about it, and how do we continually modify and adapt? So that's been the growth curve. WASC now, for over almost 40 plus years, it's been focused on learning. And in the past, what you found is, well, do you have this document and this document? But we never ask, are those documents supporting the learning and the desired goals? And I would say since COVID, this has really pushed the envelope on as we're working with our schools internationally and here in stateside, how are you using the process to look at what I call the new norm? Because the frightening thing is, as we look at all the changes in the world that have transpired, how are we preparing students not just to be critical thinkers, effective communicators, contributors to being globally minded? How are we preparing them for the unknown as we look at the knowledge, concepts, and skills? And so this has caused many schools to think, and how accreditation can push the envelope on, that's great, here's where we are, but where do we need to be? Always keeping at least a 3-year view, where do we need to be? And how are we going to get there practically, step by step by step? And is it making a difference? In my recent trainings in communication with schools, the key word I'll say in today's thing is impact. I think we've grown in that concept. That's great, you've got this. Yes, you need policies and procedures. Yes, you need sustainability with facilities, quality staff, well-developed curriculum and that. But overall, is it working? What's the impact and how do you know it? So we've really come a long way from, quote, quality assurance alone.
One of the things that's impressed me about WASC and in my personal situation has made life a little easier is the synchronous aligned processes with other agencies, right? Whether it's IB or, there's a alphabet soup of different agencies. Can you talk about how WASC at your level, the leadership level, goes about building relationships with other entities, other accrediting and quality assurance entities, and how that comes about, and how WASC decides when and if to sign that agreement?
Great. I'm glad you brought that up because I want to elaborate. We note historically, let's use that word, there were 6 accrediting agencies in the United States. And we all work with the Office of Overseas Schools for International Work, which started in the 60s when people started going. And the Department of Ed does not accredit or recognize secondary schools. They just look at the Perkins grants and the student loans. But they know and recognize that we are quality existing structures. And we do collaborate and share regularly in conversations what we're learning. And that also involves affiliates. Many of us work with the same affiliates. So there's 2 levels. First of all, with some of the other accrediting agencies, we literally do joint processes. For example, we have schools that collaborate with Middle States and WASC together. I have one in Bahrain coming up. It's an international school that will do a joint accreditation. We have then, based on that, we agree which protocol and how we'll work together. Now, over the years, WASC has been very proactive in saying, we want to make sure our protocols and processes address the constituency with whom we're serving. So out of that came work with Western Catholic Education Association, Seventh-day Adventists, California Association of Independent Schools, Hawaii Independent the Waldorf Association, the American Montessori, and I can go on and on, East Asia Organization, as well as other accrediting bodies to formalize memorandums of understanding. You mentioned IB. We started working with them in 2003 because they were saying, is there any way to streamline and pull things together? So we have a formalized memorandum of understanding, and we've tightened up so that things that are expected for IB can also be applied to the WASC accreditation standards or vice versa. So we have many affiliates in which we've adapted our focus on learning protocol, or we've agreed to use their protocol so that we are truly serving the beliefs of that group. For example, Association of Christian Schools International. They, in the protocol we use, they have addressed their religious beliefs and values, and that's important along with the WASC criteria. At the commission meeting that just occurred recently, the commission approved the updated National Lutheran School Accreditation MOU, which honors that the protocols will address their beliefs and values as well as the focus on learning. So we're always constantly, how do we pull it together? If I were going to stand on the table where we're sitting, David, and interviewing, I would say our commitment is we're supporting continuous improvement in schools and high quality learning and well-being. Why are we making busy work for schools? Let's get down to what needs to occur. And I think focus really helped us even be more streamlined. What are the most important things school leaders, governing boards need to focus on as they engage everyone? Because our emphasis engaging everyone in the process of looking at the student learning, how do we make that happen and support the schools?
For the people who may not know, how does WASC support itself as an organization financially?
Okay, we have a membership fee. I would say we're the least expensive of all the accrediting agencies. The 6 that I mentioned that have sort of 3 have emerged together, the private school affiliates, and also some we work with internationally. When an in-person visit occurs, David, then the school reimburses direct expenses, but we're very cost conscious that a school and the team works to keep the costs down. And then also the major expense for the schools in terms of follow-up visits mid-cycle. Since COVID, we've done some virtually, so there's a more modest fee. If the people go in person, then they pay direct expenses. But as we all know, since COVID, some costs have gone up tremendously, and with inflation, so again, we're very cost conscious, and the size of the team also, because we don't want it to be a burden. And I'm happy to say that we really, the annual fees give us a base, and then the visit fees are sort of in and out.
So you mentioned COVID, and obviously the pandemic completely turned our lives upside down in so many different ways. What impressed me about WASC was that processes continued. Right. Cycles continued, visits continued. Can you talk about some of the unique challenges of the decisions to move the organization forward, despite the fact that we couldn't see each other in person for a long time?
Well, March 16th, 17th, as you know, 2020, we said, oh my goodness, we have all these visits still. What do we postpone? What do we continue virtually? And so, of course, we communicated with other accrediting agencies, and out of that, we created virtual guidelines for visits. And then I also offered internationally, particularly, different options. We could postpone, we could do virtual, we could do what we call progressive visit at different times, as we all quickly learned how to use virtual techniques. Mainly it was either Zoom, Google Meets, or Microsoft Teams. And so as we clarified the guidelines, these were very important points we said. The visit will be as rigorous as an in-person visit. We will focus on the most important things for student learning, and you will still come out with where you're going next. And so I found people were very helpful. We did have to change some techniques. The downside of virtual, even though they all went very well, I had to chair 9 full visits myself. 4 of them were IB synchronized. You could not get into as many classes as you would like.
Right.
You could not be on campus and feel that informal ethos of the school. But thanks to iPads, people walking around, and pre-videos, you got a very good sense. And we actually found the conversations in the Zoom meetings or virtual meetings were very direct. You didn't waste time on other things. But the one thing we learned technically, you couldn't have a room of 12, 15 people because it was very hard to hear.
Right.
So we had people have their own device in their rooms join. So we learned, and as we would share with other agencies how to conduct virtual visits, some parts of our region, like Pacific Islands, they had to update their internet capacity to do it, but it's worked well. So out of that, what we see when we organize a full visit, and I'll use you as an example, when you were preparing for this upcoming visit that you just completed, we could do many meetings virtually that we never thought were possible. And so you can check in more often with schools, with visiting teams and chairs on any questions or things they wanted to clarify, quickly show samples, so that between that and the use of tools like Google, very effective in terms of preparing reports. So we now have added 2 options. Some schools, just still because of challenges, may do a hybrid. We may do total virtual for mid-cycle unless the school feels strongly in person, or certain types of what we call substantive changes. Probationary schools that have major challenges, we feel we should go in person. But our overall guideline for a WASC commission is every 5-6 years we do want to have some folks there in person. But we also saw that you can minimize, in some cases, certain numbers of people that need to be on a visit, or you can pre-plan. Some of our feedback to date shows we got more parent input by virtual meetings. So even if we're having an in-person meeting, many schools have said, parents that can't come to the site, feel free, here's the link, please join us virtually for the meeting. So I'm excited because we're getting more quality input, and people are very comfortable throughout the world with these virtual tools.
We experience the same thing where our parent events are much better. There's much better attendance online than used to be in person. And I think that it probably skews socioeconomically and working parents versus parents who either don't work or have a lot of flexibility in their day and can get to the campus in person. So we noticed that. Another thing that keeps coming up in my work is that when you're on a Zoom call, you can see everybody's face in a meeting.
That's right.
So it's really physically impossible to be in a meeting in a focus group of 10 people and see everybody's facial expression simultaneously, but you can see that on a computer screen.
That's right.
And so I think that's one of the hidden gifts of this, is that if you're talking about a topic that might elicit some sort of facial expressions in real life, you might not pick them up, but you do. I should say in face-to-face you don't pick them up, but on a screen you do.
That's right.
Yeah, it's been an interesting thing. What are some of the mistakes or missteps that you see schools and school districts and charter organizations make as they approach the WASC process? And what advice would you give to make this entire process more effective on behalf of students? What are some missteps?
Well, I'm not promoting our book, but there is a scenario in there.
I will. I'll promote it.
But here's my big concern. And I've had teachers come to me. I remember doing a training, and they said, Marilyn, we need your help. We have a brand new principal who doesn't understand the power of continuous improvement. And the thing is, it's on the to-do list, and all it is get it done. You're an English major. You're a good writer. Just write. Without thinking about, the goal is that we involve everyone in analysis and reflection and where we want to be and who we are and who are the students. So to me, we need to continually do a stronger job on reaching out to leadership, governing boards, and strong teacher leaders. And that's why we're doing more virtual training than in person, but then they can bring teams, and using the tools of breakout rooms and conversations, and the fact that we have advisors, because the biggest mistake is they see it as to-do list. And I'll give you an example. I remember talking to someone, and they were so proud, oh, we got a 6-year accreditation. And then I wanted to say, well, what are you going to do next? What's your plan all about? What are you going to do? How are you growing? There is no perfect school. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, 1985, the good school. The sign of a good school is they are willing to say, we can always grow. So folks on this podcast, I think a reference that I've used for years is Dr. Michael Fullen's work. He's professor emeritus, University of Toronto. And one of the books, he's a very prolific writer, in 2016 is called Coherence Making. And when we read it, Dr. Groves read it, we said, wow, this is what our process can do. And this guides what a school should do. If you're a new leader of the school, this process will help you focus. What are our major challenges and goals? How do we give everyone input to look at what's working, what's not working? Building that collaborative culture, which makes a difference in change. Looking at external, internal data continually, information and evidence, soft and hard data. Qualitative to me is equally important to quantitative. So the big mistake is the leader sees it as a to-do list and not continue. They're just worried, oh, we've got accredited. Wait a minute, that's just the beginning.
Right.
It's a 6-year continuous cycle. And how do you build it into your structures? So one of our emphases is, what existing structures do you have? If you have PLCs, data teams, how do you use that information to look at progress on your plan? It's not just plan alone, it's how the structures support it. And this doesn't happen overnight, David. It takes continuous work and leadership attitude, because there's so many competing initiatives. And how do you see, we have a plan, we need to move forward, how do we engage everyone? So you don't even have to say, don't say it's WASC accreditation, it's your ongoing process. But that's a challenge for a leader.
I'm in a lot of schools. You're in far more than I am, but I've been in this game for quite some time, and I think in education today we have no lack of initiatives. We've got one layered on top of the other, and we seldom remove them. Right? We've got a closet of clothing from the 80s that we haven't removed our white leather ties and parachute pants from, and we just keep adding, but we don't prioritize, and we don't see how they're connected. And I can speak from personal experience. These are things that I think about every day. So that idea of coherence, I wish I could get Fallen on my on my podcast, but that idea of the connection between initiatives, and then at times sunsetting some things, right?
That's right.
Maybe they've been initiated by leaders who are no longer with the organization. There's not a lot of buy-in, but they sit there, they occupy space and oxygen and resources. I think that's what's so powerful. It's not always more, right? I mean, we have an embarrassment of riches in this country. Even when economic times are tough, our schools don't lack for this new program and this new protocol, and let's buy this software and let's do this other thing. But how do they all connect on behalf of students, I think, is the biggest challenge. How does WASC assure fidelity and consistency programmatically when a large part of the work that's done out in the field on campuses is conducted by volunteers? If 5,200 and some odd schools around the world.
Yeah.
It's a huge network, and WASC has a fantastic professional staff that's employed by WASC, but most of the work out in sites is done by volunteers. So there's a training piece, but then what? How do we assure that those volunteers are representing the organization appropriately?
Yeah. It's amazing how well the grassroots works overall. And my first executive director, Dr. Donald Halverson, when I joined in 1987, I remember at workshops, David, he would hold his hands out to the chairs and members. You are WASC, because you're out there. The Leveler are the WASC International Research-Based Standards. We recently updated our criteria and indicators for California, for private schools, for international. And so that's the leveler. For example, if you and I are on a visit and we're looking at how well is the school doing, and the school used the same set of criteria and indicators, and we have developed and continually refined what we call is a status determination worksheet, so that we've created a rubric there based on the descriptors of what constitutes a rigorous, well-developed curriculum. And we have that in a rubric that the school would refer to. How well are we doing as we look at what exists? We would use the same leveler to say, all right, this school appears to be, based on the evidence they provided, what we have found. So that becomes the leveler. The commissioners are another level, because commissions read every report, and they use the same criteria indicators and say, we're not sure this is clear. They will contact the chair and team to be sure what we found reflects what would support a school as a 6-year status or a school that needs more greater support and helping them. So we have built in expectations, and we only use educators that are qualified educators. In other words, they've had the education, they've had the training in their subject areas, and when we put a team together, we look for a good cross-section based on the needs of the school. For example, if we're doing a WASC International Baccalaureate synchronized visit, we make sure the people on the team have an understanding of the International Baccalaureate curriculum. If we're going to an alternative ed school, it's important we have people that have had experience. So between their experience, our criteria indicators, the status determination worksheet, because built into the standards are also 5 other outcomes of quality change based on our guiding principles. The school shows evidence of high quality student achievement. There is total involvement and collaboration in the process. The school is genuinely demonstrating continuous improvement as you look at their past progress, and also that they have proposed within our process, we don't wait, what is your update action plan going to look like? How is it aligning if you have a district plan you need, like the LCAP, to apply? And then above all, is there the ownership and capacity to move forward? So those are important factors that came out of our work. And we developed the status worksheet years ago, and it's really been a helpful tool, David, to bring teams together to consensus on the same beliefs, as well as help the schools think about where are we ourselves, because you're counting on first school self-reflection, transparency, and honesty, and then the team coming in and reflecting.
Can you talk a bit about the expansion of WASC internationally? We know when I first started to learn about WASC, just as I described earlier, I had no idea that there were schools internationally. I thought Western U.S., and so turns out it's all over the United States, but it's also lots of schools in Asia, and I know that's grown. How has that come about, and what are some of the particular both opportunities and also challenges that's presented?
Well, we've always worked with the Department of State, Office of Overseas Schools, and what happened in the 60s, the accrediting agencies in the U.S. were contacted as companies started going overseas because parents were saying, we need quality schools for our children. So there was what we called, technically it's a Hague apostille that was signed literally in The Hague by the Department of State that gave full approval for WASC to be a worldwide accrediting body. And in the 1960s, we started geographically, at that time, the accrediting bodies divided up. We were supposed to particularly work in Asia because of our proximity. New England and Middle States particularly worked in Europe and Africa because they're on the east coast of the U.S. North Central was in the middle at that time. They particularly worked with the Department of Defense schools. And Northwest was a group that didn't really reach out overseas, eventually started working with some schools in Russia. Now, some of the groups have combined, and we literally have 4 bodies, Cognia, that works with different groups. But what I would say is the 60s was pivotal. We had 5 schools in the Asia area, began working with us as candidates becoming accreditation. And then the world realized, as families said, well, why can't our children study in the US or Canada or Australia or UK? How do we get our children into colleges and universities across the world? Well, then accreditation began to expand to a much broader number of schools. So we now have about 560 internationally that we work with, as well as about 2,700 plus in California, public schools, private schools. So overall, it's growing 5,200 plus. But that sort of expanded step by step as we collaborated. So we've adapted focus on learning for international emphases and work with the Office of Overseas Schools in that vein. And then we also work with the Department of Ed in California and Hawaii, so that the basic emphasis on this podcast that I've shared is the same, but we adapt it to the needs and the challenges of the particular constituency.
And I'd imagine that local culture comes into play significantly. I'd imagine, Los Angeles is not the same as Beijing in terms of the whole cultural context around a visit and accreditation and quality assurance.
That's right. And we might be accrediting a school that is a very strong school in certain beliefs, so that you need to honor that if you go. Just like if we went to LA with a conservative church school of some type, that we would honor their beliefs. But I would say the basic premise of high quality learning and well-being are the same, and that is similar across the world but adapted. Mm-hmm. And so we've trained people from stateside to go overseas, building the capacity of overseas people. We also bring people from overseas into other parts of our region. So it's been a great communication tool, and always honoring the culture. I would say internationally, many countries have a requirement that if you are approved as an international school within our jurisdiction, you still are required to provide language and culture, which is great. So in Thailand, for example, all international schools provide Thai language and culture courses. And we do look at that as part of our accreditation. China, likewise. And to me, that's powerful because you're guests in their country, you're learning and sharing. And above all, if you look at all our protocols, we're always emphasizing, in today's world, are we preparing students who are globally competent? As we've worked with Dr. Tony Jackson at the Asia Society, he's now retired, we developed global competencies because in today's world, whether you're based in the U.S., based in other parts of the world, how are you globally minded and value diversity, different points of view, to work in a peaceful, collaborative setting? And so to us, that's key. And some of our schools stateside actually are called San Francisco International High School, French American International School, so that I would say the world's become closer, which is powerful. And some of our top universities here in the U.S. actually have satellites that our senior commission accredits in the Middle East and other parts of the world.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit, and you mentioned this previously, and you said you didn't want to plug your book, but I do want to plug it. So Connecting the Dots, a book that you wrote with Dr. Groves. How was that process of distilling a lifetime of experience into the book, and was there anything that you discovered that surprised you in researching the book?
I would say the first thing was writing the book to me was cathartic. It was during COVID, and I've been with WASC a long time and developed a lot of these ideas that people share, and so I was part of the team where we would further develop and elaborate. So it was a time to sort of pull it all together. And with that, we did get the blessings of the other accrediting agencies. So I found some of the surprises that you ask about were understanding how certain groups evolved, particularly looking at the DEI issue. Now that's key. And then also as we communicate with the other bodies, we're all realizing how are we becoming stronger in terms of transformation and helping schools set aspirational goals. So I think, to me, looking at the book and thinking, we can't be stagnant. We've got to always keep moving forward. And that's why I've stayed with WASC so long, because it's always, you're using all your research and knowledge. You're reading Gladwell's books, you're reading Simon Sinek, you're reading lots of things and say, how does this apply to supporting schools in high quality learning? And what can we do to build the capacity? And then I realized more as I wrote, one of my passions in early study with my dissertation at UCLA was, how do we as adults really get involved and committed than just seeing something as a job? And it really goes back to Malcolm Knowles' work and others, Judith Aaron Krupp, on how do we as adults really maximize our knowledge and understanding. Gene Hall's work out of the University of Texas, for example, levels of concern. Here I'm working at a school and I've got the brand new teacher that's not quite clear what's going on, to the veteran teacher, I've been there before, this too will pass. And I think, how do we build that? And I think, because people have said to me, well, accreditation isn't going to last, it's going to go on. And I think, no, the book gave me the insight, it will. If we keep moving with the times, these are wonderful tools that just reinforce what you read out in literature, and that collaboration, pulling people together. These are simple things, as you heard the principal yesterday at the commission meeting say, I use that process to build my teacher leaders and to build people together. So the book reinforced, yes, we've got to keep moving forward and saying, are we focusing on the most important things to support a school and help them see it's their process, and we're providing the structure, including school board and leadership as well as teachers. So it just sort of reinforced and renewed, yep, this has been my major life work, and I'm excited, but I'm always growing and learning at the same time.
It's been, you note in the book that that not much research has been done on accreditation, and it's fertile ground for further research. Right? I'm hoping people will focus on this area in doctoral dissertations, et cetera. The topic of commitment is something that has interested me for a long time. In our staff leadership team, we've been working on the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Lencioni, I can't remember his first name, I think it's Peter, but and one of the levels, it starts at trust or absence of trust, and then it builds up, and one of the levels is commitment. And in doing that work and discussions and exercises with my team, I realized that we didn't even have a common understanding of what commitment meant. Some people thought commitment was, I show up every day, I'm the first one there, and I'm the last one to leave. And I grind it out, and so no one can say I'm not committed. And then other people said, but wait a second, what are you committed to? You could show up first and be the last to leave and not be committed to the right stuff. You could just be committed to trying to outwork other people. So I think that's, for me, where the value of a continuous improvement process comes in, right? Is that really defines what you're really, are you collectively committed to the same work?
Exactly. And so I always visualize, when we first introduced Focus on Learning, we did an activity, in those days an in-person workshop, where we had a graduation gown, and we said, envision, what does the concept of a graduate profile look like? What are the characteristics? All right. And so I think our process helps put before, even visually, you see, who are we preparing? Where do we see them going? And so as you think about adult learning, so are we passionate about that? Are we rolling up our sleeves and getting involved in the right activities and discussions? Are we self-directed, not being just told to do it, that it's part of what we do as leaders? And so that's where it does go back to the leadership and getting others excited who might be on the borderline. And in the book, wrote a little scenario that sort of evolved about my work is a teacher was bemoaning, oh, darn, we got to go through WASC again. And then the new leader comes in and says, hey, wait a minute, it's going to be different. This is your process.
Right.
And how he got very excited about it in that case. And I think that's where Michael Fullen, in several of his publications, makes the point, as others, celebrate the little successes along the way. And I think as school leaders, engaging people and looking at themselves and that, we want to celebrate little steps as we look at, but always keeping in mind the bottom line is that successful graduate who's prepared for the known and the unknown. And I think the most emotional telling thing during COVID for me was working with a school in Myanmar who had just been through not just COVID, but the coup. And the leaders of the school, teacher leaders as well as admin, said, you know, Marilyn, we've got our basic school-wide learner goals, preparing students with the knowledge and skills and so forth. But the bottom line we realized through all we've been through is, are we preparing the students for the unknown?
Right.
And that sort of grabbed the staff. In fact, the head said, were more motivated, even though they couldn't even see each other, it was all virtual, on working on things and integrated discipline units and working to say, we've got to move these kids on in spite of all the things. And so it was really a exciting, positive atmosphere because you could see you could get very depressed when you're locked in your apartment the whole time, families too, and so forth. So that's where I light up and smile because you can make this work for your school.
My grandmother always talked about lifters and leaners. She was born in 1915, so lifters and leaners. And the lifters who inherently jump in and lift, and then the leaners, and they never lift. But the older I get, I really realize that the beautiful thing is people aren't fixed in their roles, but it's incumbent upon leadership to define what it really means to lift and inspire to lift. So we're not just attributing something that someone doesn't do to laziness or that they're just apathetic, but perhaps they don't see this as even being meaningful, as that anecdote that you described of the new principal coming in and saying, hey, we're doing this, but you're doing it because this is going to be your process.
Right.
It's very different from saying this came down on high and it came down the food chain, and so you're going to do it. And I know even in watching C-SPAN, which I do when I have insomnia, which is fairly frequent, even the military, the U.S. military has realized that just this straight line top down doesn't work to get people inherently motivated.
That's right.
They're talking about buy-in in a different way. They're talking about portfolios of skills rather than you just do this because your commanding officer told you to do it.
Exactly.
But it's messy, but beautiful.
That's right. It's messy because you have that, and then you have, that's why I always go back to Gene Hall's levels of commitment and concern at all levels, and how do you engage them? Because if I'm in the 20s, first-time teacher, I have a different viewpoint than a 40-year-old.
Yeah, we have to acknowledge all of those.
That's right.
So I really thank you for your time. I know you're really busy. I have one surprise question for you at the end of the interview, but I wanted to give you the opportunity. Is there anything that we left out that you would have liked to talk about accreditation, or perhaps what Marilyn does where she finds joy in her life outside of WASC? You're the most tireless worker that I've ever seen. It seems like every time we sit down to commission, you say, okay, I have to wake up at 3 a.m. because I have a call with Vietnam, so I don't know how you do it. But is there anything we left out for today?
I just would re-emphasize, and some of you may have heard the story on this podcast. Years ago, I was doing an in-person training in Redding, California. And to this day, I do not know the name of the young woman, but she raises her hand and says, Marilyn, WASC has a boring title, Western Association of Schools and Colleges. And we realize now, when we incorporated, it should have been worldwide because we say we're worldwide. But Marilyn, if you look at the first letter, WASC, think about we are student-centered. And that's really been our branding for some time. And I have to give credit to someone I don't know. Maybe someday someone will come up to me and say, I'm actually the one that said that. But I think, and then my follow-up story, I was in a place called China, Dalian, China, and it was Qingdao. I'm sorry, that's why I had to hesitate, because we were in Qingdao, China, and a school was being run by the ministry. They wanted an international school for the companies that were coming into that area. And one of the vice chairs, a very professional leader, a woman, came up to me and didn't know any English beyond she shook my hand, because I had met her once before, and they had translated my presentation. And what she said to me in perfect English is, "We are student-centered." She wanted me to know, because she was sort of the government official overseeing this international school, we are student-centered. And again, I broke out into a big smile, because I thought, she's got it. That's what it's all about.
Okay, the last question is this. You have the opportunity to have a Goodyear blimp and a message on the side of the Goodyear blimp, and it can't be "We are student-centered."
What?
Well, maybe it is. Maybe you already got to the end. What message would you have on there to the world about the importance of accreditation and, why people should even pay attention to this? What would you put up there that would really capture people's imagination?
I'm not sure this would grab their imagination, but I would say WASC is synonymous with continuous improvement.
And not just a discrete checklist item.
That's correct.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful concept. It's something that in my time on the commission has become a much deeper experience for me, as I get to see kind of how the sausages are made behind the scenes, and the for all listeners, commissioners really do read all of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of school reports and think really deeply about these issues. So I really want to thank you, Marilyn, for your time. And I know you're going to whisk off somewhere, and then you're going to be, you have Vietnam?
Vietnam for the next 2 nights, yeah.
Vietnam for 2 nights, and
then Hawaii.
So you get to virtually travel the world.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure learning from you.
Thanks, David.
Yep. Thank you for listening to the Superintendent's Hangout. You can follow me on Twitter at DVS1970. Please be sure to share this show with friends and family on social media and in the real world. Thank you to Brad Bacayal for editing and production assistance, and to Tina Royster for scheduling and logistics. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great day.